coming to question and answer. We'll have a 10-minute rebuttal from Malcolm.
I think that's fair. It might have even been more. It might have been helpful if I had given my rebuttal first to highlight what I think are the important disagreements. We'll get that in the conversation anyway. I think that the most important part of Dr. Rana's presentation is his use of the concept of the image of God, because that's really where that's the concept that does the most work, so to speak, in his argument. Because he wants to say that it's really the fact that we're made in the image of God that gives us value. And my response to this is, first of all, what's so special about the image of God? I mean, Dr. Rana seems to take it for granted that merely asserting that we're made in the image of God automatically, self-evidently shows that we're worthy of something, that we have intrinsic value. But why? What is it about being made in the image of God? What does it add? What does that add to the value of human beings that we didn't already value? And I think the answer is, when you take a look at how he defines the image of God, when he elucidates it, when he gives it meaning, he says that it's the extent to which we are intellectual, moral, and spiritual, and relational. So, in other words, he defines what God looks like, the image of God, in terms of what human beings are. So, again, you see this sort of circularity to his arguments, where he's saying the basis of human morality is the image of God, but the image of God is how human beings actually are. So have we actually added anything by using the phrase the image of God, or have we just led ourselves in sort of like a roundabout circle? And I think that's what I want to suggest, is that we haven't actually added anything. Why not just recognize, my question would be, why not just recognize that humans are valuable, full stop? What's so difficult about that? The other things that I thought were disagreeable there was a lot that I agree with as well in Dr. Rana's presentation, and I appreciated the honesty with which he presented his ideas. I do disagree, however, with the logic of his observing that human technology and culture has followed this sort of exponential growth, and therefore concluding that it would require a divine intervener to get that sort of going. And this was an argument that he made last night as well. This fact and I don't dispute that it is a fact, that we see a sudden increase in human culture and technology, is easily explicable and has been explained by the feedback loop process of technology. When you make yourself a hammer, when you make yourself that first hammer, it's difficult to make a hammer. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to make a hammer from scratch. It's not easy, but once you do, you're able to hammer in anything that you want, and you're off and going. And once you start hammering things in, then you can make other machines that are able to do more, that can get you doing other things that will get you to do more. And this is the process that we see in every sort of technological explosion, ever since the Industrial Revolution. And we see it going on today with the doubling rate of, I'm in computer engineering, so this is something that is a relevant example to me. It might be boring to you guys, but the doubling rate of transistors on a CPU chip follows this sort of exponential increase. There's nothing divine about this sort of exponential increase. But more broadly, we can see that this sort of argument has the flavor of a God of the gaps sort of argument, in which Dr. Rana is observing something that's apparently difficult to explain. So, suppose you don't accept my suggestion that his observation is explicable by naturalistic means, and you say, no, I'm still baffled. Fine. But the fact that there are gaps in our scientific understanding is not a justification for wedging God into those gaps. One can never conclude anything from the recognition that one is ignorant about how things happened in the past. I grant, don't get me wrong, I do grant that if there was a omniscient, all-powerful mind who was able to interact with the earth, thinking that that mind would be able to create human beings with the morality that we have. But the point is, we can't conclude the existence of such a mind from the fact that we don't understand how things work. That's just a non sequitur. Moreover, the idea that the exponential increase of human technology and culture is somehow in contradiction or tension with evolution, because evolution requires gradual change, is really a fundamental misunderstanding of the word gradual in the context of evolutionary theory. There's nothing about evolutionary theory that requires that change be linear, which is how Dr. Rana is interpreting it. The requirement of evolution is that it be continuous, that there be no sudden discontinuous leaps. And it's true that we observe discontinuities because of the limitation of evidence in the fossil record and other things as well. But we fill in those discontinuities with observations in other sciences like genetics and biogeography and things like that. And so the exponentiality of human progress is not a problem for evolution, as Dr. Rana suggests. Actually, Richard Dawkins does a very good job of explaining how this works in The Blind Watchmaker. He has a whole chapter on punctuated equilibrium. I recommend that you take a look at it if you're not convinced of what I just said. He also talks about how Mark Hauser... I was surprised, actually, that Dr. Rana didn't disagree with my suggestion that we can arrive at moral conclusions through rational deliberation, because he seems to be, in citing Mark Hauser's study, he seems to be suggesting that we only arrive at ethical conclusions through instinct, that it's purely like this really gut-level irrational reaction rather than being amenable to rational reflection. So I was a little bit surprised that Dr. Rana agreed with me there. And I look forward to what he has to say about that in the conversation that ensues. Beyond that, part of the problem with any flavor of creationism is that it attempts to emphasize the ways in which human beings are good and diminish or ignore the ways in which human beings are so often evil and bad, unfortunately. Evolution does account for this, given that there are instances in which it's beneficial, or human beings, individuals, can get away with cheating one another. But to suggest, for example, that looking at the effect of magnetic pulses on our brains can show us that we're intrinsically ethical beings who are incapable of losing our ethical drive. I'm not sure if that was his conclusion, but I would suggest that there are actually many physical alterations to the brain that can result in the loss of an ethical or a moral in sense. I think really the most interesting thing, unfortunately I only have a minute, but I think the most interesting thing about Dr. Rana's presentation was what he said at the end there, which was that if human origin isn't the result of some purposeful process, then how are human beings important? And I think that's another way in which we'll disagree, because I think the assumption that there needs to be a cosmic force that designed us in order for us to have value is one that I would question, and maybe think of it in terms of would we have somehow more value if you found out that we weren't created by a god, but that we were created by a super intelligent alien species that had the purpose for us to be their slaves at some point in the future. It doesn't seem to me that adds anything. In fact, I would feel somehow used or less valuable in a way if that were to be true. So that's another point of, I think, discussion between us. And my time is up. So thank you.
He's agile on his feet too. This is the fun part of being a moderator, because I get to change the rules if I want. Dr. Rana only took 5 of his 10 minutes for his rebuttal. So I thought I'd give him an opportunity, except I get to make the rules.